Thank you for taking my call. For your previous caller, which says, regime change and this and that, I'm not going to get into it, take your time or anyone else. But the reality is 93 million people are living in Iran. The Reza Pahlavi doesn't even have 500,000 followers. All the rest, what they're going to do is that
Manas, just so people know, when you say Reza Pahlavi, you're talking about the former Shah of Iran's
the former Shah of Iran did, we just say quarter of the Pahlavi, with the people making fun of it. It doesn't matter. What it is, in Iran, since this war happened, everybody went towards the government and supporting because they feel the land being attacked, not the government. Because they were doing a very hard job to get rid of them. But this war ruined it. You know what I'm trying to say? Now they just went towards the government in order to save the land. That's how they feel. This is the truth. But the reason I'm phoning is we're all getting affected by this war. Iran killing, all the Jews and Tel Aviv and etc. And they attacking. What's going on? And then all these prices going up. You and me living here, we have to pay higher mortgage, higher electricity, gas, and so on and so forth. What are we going to do? The power of people is much stronger than certain people on the top deciding for us. We've got to get together in your, radio with me. There's my circle of, friends and organization and etc. to stop the war. We've got to bring the peace. This is affecting the whole world.
So do you believe that, my guest earlier, as you say, Halle Blake, was saying that there is, for now anyway, a great deal of support for the war inside Iran amongst the large parts of the population. But you seem to be saying the war will either change their minds about the regime and say better the devil you know, or it will just leave people, or it will leave. Well, it's hard to measure that, isn't it? Particularly because of the difficulties communicating in Iran. But at the very least, the stresses of war, the demands of war, will mean that those people who might be able to secretly organise simply can't move about, simply can't do what they want to do.
The revolution in Iran happened 5 times. Once was a Mossadegh, the other time was Mashruta. I don't know if you're aware of these. These ones just got a very Persian word. If I'm telling those Iranians who are listening, they know exactly what it is. People in Iran always rise up when the government was cruel, always. And they managed to change it to one way or other. When you start having a war, it just bloodshed. We don't get anywhere, both sides. Now look what's happening to the Jew over here. Are we creating a platform safe and easy and nice for them? No. It just jeopardized the whole thing. If we can promote...
Yes, but then listen, hang on. The current anti-Semitism in this country very much predates the start of this war on Iran. And the reason I'm resistant, I'm not saying it doesn't throw up bad feeling, of course it does, but the reason I'm resistant that October the 7th is the singular reason why anti-Semitism has spiked in this country, or that the war in Iraq is the singular reason why there is antipathy towards Jews and Israelis around the world, is that it's been going on for thousands of years. All the traits of anti-Semitism from thousands of years ago are visible daily on the streets of Europe, on the streets of America, in conversations on social media.
Sheila, you said it. Shall I stop you? You said it is in Europe. If you go to the history of Palestine, Muslim and Christian, the Jew were living side by side, babysitting, even marrying each other and trading. So it's not over there. It was in Europe. So we have to sort out this anti-Semitism here.
It was over there. Anti-Semitism.
No, it wasn't.
Jews have been forced out of many countries in the Middle East and North Africa.
Well, in Middle East they are scattered, but then in Iran,
they didn't scatter. They were forced out.
A million Jew living in Iran, and they're quite happy. And they're on the side of the government. Interesting enough. But then if you go to Palestine history, Christian and Muslim and Jew were living side by side. I'm not going to go to the history. My point of by phoning is we've got to stop the war, please. If you're running this show in and out daily, promote this, put it in people's mind. War got to stop. Then we can do something. Otherwise, it's just going to be bloodshed and killing. That's all I'm trying to say. Thank you for taking my call.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you. Do call again. Thank you, Manas. I was called from Enfield. Hello, Jacob.
Hi, Sheila. Hi. Hope you have a nice day.
I have, yeah. Thank you. You too.
Yeah, so I'm going to come from it like this from a different angle. I'm not Jewish. I'm not on any of the sides. But I feel like I'm going to add in, I'm 23 years old.
Yeah.
So I feel like over time, people, especially like our generation, they are starting to see a few of the hypocrisies. I'm happy that woman said it previously, that Jews, Christians, Palestinians, Muslims all live together. Because that is the truth. Like, people don't have an issue with Jews. And it's true that anti-Semitism is 100% on the rise. You can see it. But I feel like it's intellectually dishonest for us to not be honest and say why we can all clearly see why that is happening. People are not happy with what's happening in Israel. And that's just the truth about it. It's not... I don't think people specifically want to just hate Jews or anything like that.
When you say in Israel, do you mean by the government of Benjamin Netanyahu?
Yes, I do. Like, for example, Iran, they have their proxies and all these things. Yeah, their proxies. But with their proxies, the truth is they are fighting oppression. When stuff like that happens, you're labelled a terrorist. Nelson Mandela was a terrorist until 2008. Anyone with any right...
You would equate Hezbollah and Hamas with Nelson Mandela?
I don't agree with all their decisions and what they do, because Mandela did try to do it through peace. That's the difference.
A big difference, Jacob.
But no one's always going to do it the same way, unfortunately. When someone's oppressed, you can't tell them how to respond. They're going to fight back for their lives.
Is rape resistance?
Of course not. And you're not going to see me lie and say that is. Of course not. Whoever's done that, that's that individual that is messed up in the head. That's got nothing to do with anyone.
Well, it is, but it was also part of the instruction manual for what to do on October the 7th. So it wasn't just some slightly disturbed young youth doing it. It was part of the plan.
That's sick. And what I can say is that is sick. But on the other hand,
can you see, therefore, from the Israel? I don't doubt there are disputes between Israel and Palestine. Of course, I don't. But can you see from the point of view of the Israeli citizen, they don't quite see it your way when you say that they are the oppressor. That actually, when they have to take their children into shelters, when they have to have an iron dome of defence around the whole country because of attacks by these Mandela-esque proxies, as you see them, are firing missiles over them, and they were doing so well before the Iranian war started.
I completely agree. They're not
entirely the only oppressor in the region, are they? Or the only fighter in the region?
No, I don't disagree. But then what I would ask you is, it's the same for Palestine. So Palestinians were in that region. Obviously, we know what happened to the Israelis. They got pushed out. Romans got So they've come back. And what I would expect to happen is people to live and to make an agreement to be together.
Which has been attempted many times.
100%. But if someone's come in and then they're now above and holding someone else down, like what we're seeing in South Africa, anyone with good human morals can't see that and be okay with it.
But so can I ask you? All right.
Why is Iran being called terrorist? All right. Or not Israel?
Even if you see it that way, I don't particularly see it that way, Jacob. But even if you do, it's your view. You're allowed to.
Do you think that's a Western bias?
No,
though?
Hang on. You're allowed to interpret the events your way. I'm not taking that away from you for a second. Even if that's the case, why are you invoking it as a reason? And I know you're not trying to excuse anti-Semitism, but as a reason to explain anti-Semitism. Because the world, Jacob, is full of leaders. Why aren't we seeing attacks on Russian Orthodox churches? Why aren't we seeing attacks on Sudanese interests in this country? Why aren't we, thank God we're not, seeing particular attacks on people who are Sudanese refugees in this country simply because they're Sudanese? Politically, why aren't we doing that? I'll tell you why. Because we don't have an historic... But not all of us, people don't seem to have an historic loathing of those people the way there is an historic loathing of Jews in the minds and hearts of anti-Semites.
I agree, because, for example, we see the same thing with black people. If a black person does something, it's highlighted to the absolute maximum.
Or even if they don't do something, they're suspected.
Exactly. So I completely agree with you. But that doesn't mean that what Israel's not doing isn't wrong. And it doesn't mean that we can't call it out.
Of course you can call it out. I'm not suggesting for a second you can't call out any.
But that's what we have an issue with. It's not being called out. It's not. We can say it is, but it's not being called out.
How can you, Jacob? How can you say that there is no criticism of this Israeli government and the actions of Netanyahu? How can you possibly say that? This country has really strong freedom of speech, really strong freedom to protest, and has been how many protests by Jews have you seen in this country in the last 2 years? A lot fewer than you've seen by pro-Palestinian marches, perfectly within their rights to do it. The idea that the pro-Palestinian, anti-Israeli, or even just critical of Israel sector of our society has somehow been silenced is not true. It's simply not true.
But why hasn't Israel been sanctioned?
Well, some individuals haven't they?
No, Israel. No, see what I'm saying? This is what I mean.
No, some individuals have.
Sanctioned right
by this government, they have. A couple of individuals about their activities in the West Bank. I'll have to check their names, but they absolutely have. Thank you, Jacob. That you see. I do. I really do. I just take issue with some of it. Thanks, Jacob, for your call, Jacob.
At the end of the day, I've never known an army that can defend its people like they have done and give warnings to their enemies, so-called enemies, and say, look, we're going to attack this region, you better get out in 10 minutes or whatever. What army in the world, what war have we ever experienced where any army has done that? And yet they're criticised unfairly, very harshly. So I just want to make the point, it's probably the most
not always unfairly. No, I would agree with you, they are often criticised unfairly, but not always unfairly. There've been individuals and there've been mistakes like any army makes, and there've been bad individuals like any army has around the world, but the majority has a moral discipline, and I don't think enough people realise that. It's a shame, it's sad to see, and the hatred that spills onto the streets of everywhere, in England, in Europe, it's such a shame because it's misguided. You've got Zach Belansky, for example, who, being Jewish and is gay,
if he was to go and preach what he believes in Gaza, they'd hang him. They'd throw him off the top of a building, even though he supports the Gazans and he supports Palestinians and he says Zionism is racism, which is nonsense. If he was to enter Gaza, he'd be thrown off a building by the Gazans for being gay. And that's the irony of this.
That doesn't mean he's not allowed to criticise Israel, though, does it?
No, I never said he can't. Anyone can criticise Israel. The good thing is, in Israel, even Israelis can criticise their own government, but they don't get shot and killed or put away in prison like they do in some other countries, like Iran.
Well, no, you're right, not comparatively, but my God, some of those protests in Israel in the last 3 years, predating and postdating October the 7th, the authorities were incredibly tough on some of those protesters, weren't they?
No, I don't think anything other than norm. No more worse than in England when there's protesters marching. If they break the law, they're arrested. And at the end of the day, I don't know of any country, that can be so, have a moral discipline where they can even take their own prime minister to court. It's happened. And, I just don't understand why there's so much hatred by not just, non-Jews, but even some Jewish people. They complain and fine, they're entitled to, they're free to do that.
When all is said and done, It's just a government. You can comment on a government.
Yes, you can, but there shouldn't be the hatred.
No, of course. Do you welcome Tony Blair's intervention?
I do. I think he's obviously speaks from the heart in that sense. I know that everyone's criticised him for what happened in Iraq and supporting the Americans and supporting Bush. But then again, you could argue Saddam Hussein was a weapon of mass destruction. He was responsible for 1 million deaths.
No, let's not relitigate that, I don't think, Mike. Thank you very much indeed, Mike.